It's a strange thing how long a person can endure chaos, how long they can rationalize cruelty, dismiss their own suffering, and carry the emotional burdens of someone who refuses to carry their own. And it's even stranger how often this kind of endurance is mistaken for weakness, when in fact it's one of the rarest kinds of strength. Now imagine the super empath, someone wired for compassion, for understanding, for sacrifice, someone who sees the brokenness in others and instinctively tries to mend it, even at great personal cost. And then imagine that same empath entangled with a narcissist, an individual whose identity is built on manipulation, on domination, on the unrelenting extraction of emotional energy from those around them. The relationship is asymmetrical. It's not built on mutual respect. No, it's built on control, on deceit, on a parasitic dynamic where one gives and the other consumes. And yet the empath stays. They stay because they believe people can change, that love redeems, that if they just give enough, it'll make the difference. But here's the truth. It doesn't. It can't. And there comes a day, a profoundly dangerous day for the narcissist, when the super empath sees clearly, when they finally grasp that mercy without boundaries is not virtue, it's self-betrayal. And on that day, they walk away, not with rage, not with vengeance, but with clarity, dignity, and a terrifying silence. And that moment, that's just an ending. It's a reckoning. The journey toward awakening begins not with a loud realization, but often with a quiet, creeping unease. The super empath, by nature, is someone deeply intuitive and emotionally attuned to the needs of others. They sense pain where others might see anger. They detect fear behind arrogance, and they reach out when others walk away. It is this deeply compassionate instinct that initially draws them toward the narcissist. Someone who at first glance appears wounded, misunderstood, or in need of love. The narcissist, skilled in wearing masks and mimicking vulnerability, taps into the empath's drive to heal, to save, to nurture. But over time, subtle inconsistencies begin to emerge. The narcissist's charm starts to feel rehearsed. Their vulnerability becomes a tool rather than a truth. Gaslighting creeps in, not as a blatant lie at first, but as small distortions of reality that cause the empath to question their own memory, their perceptions, even their sanity. Emotional whiplash becomes routine. One moment the empath is idealized, placed on a pedestal as the only one who understands. The next, they are devalued, discarded emotionally, accused of being too sensitive, too needy, too emotional. At first, the empath defends the narcissist. They excuse the erratic behavior, rationalize the cruelty, and internalize the blame. They work harder, love deeper, give more. They believe that somehow their devotion can heal what's broken. They begin to lose sight of themselves in the process. Their sense of identity becomes entangled in the constant effort to stabilize the relationship. They confuse pain with passion, inconsistency with complexity, and manipulation with intensity. And then comes the emotional dissonance. A part of the empath begins to feel hollow, as if their soul is slowly being siphoned. Their once vibrant intuition becomes clouded, overruled by doubt and cognitive confusion. They start to notice how isolated they've become, how friends have fallen away, how joy is dulled, how exhaustion is no longer just physical but spiritual. They begin to catch glimpses of the cycle, the pattern of love bombing, devaluation, and They begin to observe how the narcissist uses empathy as a weapon, kindness as leverage, and vulnerability as bait. The empath starts reading, learning, seeking. They stumble upon terms like narcissistic abuse, trauma bonding, and emotional manipulation, and the words hit with the weight of recognition. This isn't just a difficult relationship, it's a toxic one. What they mistook for love was control. What they thought was intimacy was enmeshment. What they believed was loyalty was actually self-abandonment. Still, there is resistance. The empath by nature doesn't want to give up on people. They hold tightly to the idea that love can change things, that maybe if they were just more patient, more forgiving, more something, it would finally work. But the more they try, the more the narcissist drains them. Each attempt at resolution ends with the empath absorbing more blame, more guilt, more shame. Eventually, a psychological shift begins to unfold. It's subtle at first, but deeply powerful. The empath begins to believe their own feelings again. They begin to trust their intuition. They start writing down conversations, documenting behaviors, not out of paranoia, but to anchor themselves to truth. They stop seeking validation from the narcissist and start finding it internally. They begin setting mental boundaries, even if they're not voiced yet. This is the moment of awakening. The realization that something is deeply wrong and that no amount of love or sacrifice will make it right. The empath begins to see clearly, not just who the narcissist is, but what they've become in that person's presence. And once seen, it cannot be unseen. The super empath's nature is fundamentally rooted in compassion. They are not just emotionally intelligent, they are emotionally responsible. They take on the pain of others as if it were their own, often without even being asked. When in a relationship with a narcissist, this quality becomes both their greatest gift and their most dangerous liability. The narcissist exploits this capacity for compassion, knowing that the empath will bend, forgive, rationalize, and endure long past the point where most would walk away. As the empath begins to awaken to the toxic dynamic they are trapped in, a deep internal war begins to stir. On one hand, they see the reality of the manipulation. They begin to feel the sharp sting of being used, lied to, devalued. Their sense of self-preservation starts to surface, whispering that enough is enough. But on the other hand, there is this immense gravitational pull toward compassion. They see the narcissist's wounds, the trauma they carry, the deep insecurity masked by arrogance and control. The empath thinks, if I walk away, who will care for them? Who will love them? This thought haunts them. This is not mere codependency, it's a moral dilemma. The empath feels that to leave would be to abandon someone who is broken. But staying means continuing to abandon themselves. The conflict becomes paralyzing. Each time the narcissist offers a breadcrumb of affection, a kind word, a glimpse of the person they once pretended to be, the empath clings to hope. They think maybe that version will return, maybe this time it will be different. That hope is powerful, but it is built on a lie. It keeps the empath in a cycle of betrayal, constantly giving more while receiving less. Over time, this internal conflict intensifies. The empath starts to feel emotionally divided. There's the part of them that still wants to believe in the good, that still hopes for transformation. But then there's another part, a quieter, wiser voice, that begins to question everything. That voice reminds them that love should not feel like survival, that being kind should not require being destroyed, that sacrificing your mental and emotional health for someone who refuses to take accountability is not noble, it's self-neglect. And yet the guilt is overwhelming. The empath feels guilty for even thinking about leaving. They question their own morality. Am I giving up on someone who needs me? Am I being selfish? These questions torment them. Because unlike the narcissist, the empath is constantly introspective, constantly evaluating their own motives, constantly trying to ensure they are acting out of integrity. But this very introspection is used against them. The narcissist twists it, feeding the empath's guilt, accusing them of being the problem, the unstable one, the ungrateful one. In this battle between compassion and self-preservation, there are moments of clarity. Flashes of insight where the empath sees the toll it has taken on their health, their spirit, their joy. They remember who they were before the relationship, open, hopeful, lighthearted. They see how far they've drifted from that person, and for a moment the weight of their own suffering becomes undeniable. They start to realize that compassion must be extended inward first, that to keep pouring into someone who only takes is not love but self-erasure. The empath begins to wrestle with a new kind of question. If I continue to save them, who will save me? This thought, painful as it is, begins to shift their perspective. They start considering boundaries not as acts of cruelty, but as acts of self-respect. They start to understand that walking away doesn't mean they don't care about themselves enough to stop bleeding for someone who never intended to stop cutting. This is the crucible moment, the psychological splitting between the empath's desire to heal others and the newfound realization that they, too, deserve to be whole. There is a limit to endurance, even for the super empath. Despite their deep well of patience and emotional generosity, there comes a point where something inside them breaks, not with drama or noise, but with a silent, undeniable shift. The breaking point is not a single event, but the culmination of countless moments of betrayal, gaslighting, and emotional starvation. It's the point at which the empath finally realizes that their love is not being received, it's being consumed. And no matter how pure their intentions, the narcissist is incapable of giving them what they give so freely. Leading up to this breaking point is a long and painful road of rationalization. The empath keeps trying to adjust their behavior, moderate their tone, suppress their needs, all in the hope of avoiding the narcissist's unpredictable reactions. They learn to walk on eggshells, to preempt conflict, to anticipate manipulation before it arrives. They tell themselves that things will get better once the narcissist isn't stressed, or once they prove their loyalty, or once they can communicate just the right way. But those moments never come. The narcissist keeps moving the goalposts, and the empath keeps chasing peace in a battlefield designed to exhaust them. Internally, the empath begins to suffer symptoms that go far beyond emotional pain. Anxiety creeps in like a fog, making it hard to breathe. Sleep becomes shallow, unrestful. The body begins to carry the trauma, the tension in the shoulders, the knot in the stomach, the fatigue that rest can't fix. Their nervous system is in a constant state of fight or flight, but there's nowhere to run, and no one to fight but the lies they keep telling themselves. At this stage, the empath may even begin to dissociate, to detach from their own emotions just to function. The cost of staying becomes higher than the fear of leaving. The breaking point may come in an instant. A cruel remark too far, a betrayal too blatant to ignore, a moment of emotional neglect during a crisis. Or it may arrive gradually, as the empath begins to emotionally withdraw, even while physically remaining present. They stop trying to explain themselves. They stop defending their feelings. They stop engaging in circular arguments that lead nowhere. This is the beginning of detachment, and though it may not be visible on the outside, it marks the first true act of self-preservation. The narcissist senses this change, but doesn't always recognize it for what it is. They may see the empath growing colder, less responsive, more distant, and they may ramp up their tactics. Love bombing returns, guilt trips intensify, threats, tears, or promises may be used in desperation to reestablish control. But something fundamental has shifted. The empath no longer reacts with the same urgency. They no longer feel the need to explain their truth. They begin to value their peace over the narcissist's chaos. This emotional breaking point is not weakness. It is the emergence of a boundary that has been suppressed for too long. It's the soul finally saying enough. It's the recognition that continuing to pour into a black hole is not generosity, it's self-destruction. The empath begins to see that saving someone who refuses to be saved is not love, it's martyrdom. And they realize they've been sacrificing their own well-being for someone who, deep down, never intended to reciprocate. What follows is not always immediate action, but a decision has been made. The empath may still stay a little longer, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, they've begun to walk away. And once that process begins, it's irreversible. The breaking point doesn't destroy them, it rebuilds them. It marks the end of survival mode and the beginning of something much more powerful, the reclamation of self. When the super empath finally decides to walk away, it doesn't look like what most people expect. There is no screaming, no public confrontation, no dramatic declarations of revenge. It happens quietly, often in the most unremarkable moment, while doing dishes, driving in silence, or sitting alone in the early hours of the morning. The decision isn't made in haste or in anger, it's made in clarity. A clarity so sharp that it cuts through every excuse, every false hope, and every illusion the narcissist has ever projected. The empath doesn't walk away because they no longer care. They walk away because they finally understand. They understand that their compassion has been weaponized. They understand that the narcissist isn't interested in healing or connection, but in dominance and control. They understand that the cycle will never stop, that apologies without change are just part of the manipulation. And most importantly, they understand that continuing to stay is a slow form of self-destruction. This clarity is both liberating and terrifying. For so long, the empath has been living in a fog, confused, second-guessing themselves, trying to decode mixed messages and reconcile the person they love with the person who hurts them. But when the fog lifts, everything comes into focus. The memories rearrange themselves. The behaviors that once seemed ambiguous now appear unmistakably toxic. The games, the blame shifting, the emotional starvation, it all becomes visible. And with that visibility comes a power the empath hasn't felt in a long time, the power to choose. When the empath walks away, it is a sacred act. It is an act of reclaiming agency, of standing up not just to the narcissist, but to the part of themselves that once believed love required suffering. The empath does not walk away because they've given up. They walk away because they finally learned to choose themselves, not out of spite, but out of necessity. They no longer need the narcissist to validate their worth because they have begun to remember it on their own. To the narcissist, this moment is jarring. Up until now, they have relied on the empath's emotional reactivity. They've thrived on the chaos, the arguments, the desperate attempts to be understood. But now, the empath no longer reacts. There is no pleading, no fighting, no trying to fix things. There is only silence. This silence is not empty, it is full. Full of everything the empath has carried. Full of every wound, every unanswered question, every boundary that was crossed. And it is in this silence that the narcissist begins to realize they've lost control. This quiet departure hits harder than any confrontation ever could. It is the moment where the empath becomes untouchable. Not because they've become cold or bitter, but because they've become resolved. They have accepted that the narcissist cannot meet them at the level of emotional depth they require, and they no longer try to shrink themselves to fit a relationship that thrives on their absence. They are no longer willing to abandon themselves in the name of loyalty. The walk away is not just physical, it is psychological, emotional, spiritual. The empath stops checking their phone for messages that will never come. They stop rehearsing conversations that would never lead to truth. They stop hoping for accountability from someone who lives in denial. And as they walk away, they are not running from the narcissist, they are walking toward themselves, toward their peace, their healing, their wholeness. And though the journey ahead will not be easy, though it will be filled with grief, self-reflection, and the rebuilding of shattered identity, the most important step has already been taken. The empath has chosen to walk away, not out of weakness, but from a place of deep, earned strength. The silence that follows is not emptiness, it is freedom. When the super empath walks away, the narcissist experiences a profound and destabilizing disruption. For so long, the empath was the perfect source of narcissistic supply, providing attention, validation, emotional labor, and often even covering for the narcissist's flaws in front of others. The narcissist became accustomed to this dynamic, entitled to it, believing it would never end. But when the empath finally detaches, not just physically but emotionally, the narcissist is thrown into a psychological crisis, not because they love the empath, but because they've lost their mirror, their enabler, their emotional fuel. At first, the narcissist may not take the empath's departure seriously. They are used to pushing boundaries and then smoothing things over with fake apologies, intermittent affection, or guilt manipulation. But this time is different. This time, the empath isn't arguing, isn't pleading, isn't reacting. This unnerving calm is not part of the narcissist's script. It's unfamiliar and deeply threatening to their sense of control. Panic begins to set in beneath their surface-level arrogance. The narcissist may attempt to reassert dominance through classic tactics, hoovering, future faking, or emotional blackmail. They might suddenly become remorseful, claim to have had an epiphany, or beg for one more chance. They may use shared history, mutual connections, or even manufactured crises to draw the empath back in. But something critical has changed. The empath no longer responds the same way. The hook doesn't sink in, the words sound hollow, the spell has broken. This loss of control sends the narcissist into what many describe as a collapse, a rapid unraveling of their emotional stability masked behind anger, confusion, or even performative victimhood. They may lash out, smear the empath's name, or try to damage their reputation to regain some semblance of superiority. Or they may spiral inward, becoming depressed, anxious, or lost without the steady emotional anchor the empath provided. Their carefully constructed identity begins to fray, revealing the inner emptiness they've long denied. What makes this collapse so significant is that the super empath, unlike others the narcissist may have cycled through, didn't just walk away. They saw the narcissist for who they truly are. They didn't leave confused or broken. They left enlightened. This kind of exit threatens the narcissist's illusion of control more than anything else, because if one person could figure them out and walk away empowered, what does that say about the lie they've built their life around? The narcissist begins to feel exposed, vulnerable in a way they've spent a lifetime avoiding. Their usual strategies, manipulation, charm, intimidation, no longer work. And without someone to project their shame onto, they are left face to face with their own unresolved inner void. Some may desperately seek a new source of supply, hoping to replicate the dynamic they lost. Others may enter a temporary state of collapse, wallowing in self-pity or spiraling into self-destruction. But what they can't do is replace the super empath, because what the empath gave wasn't transactional. It was deep, authentic, and rare. The collapse doesn't always look dramatic from the outside. To outsiders, the narcissist may appear composed, even unaffected, but beneath that facade is a crumbling sense of self. They are not mourning the loss of the empath as a person, they are mourning the loss of control, admiration, and emotional labor. And for the first time, they are left to sit with themselves. No distraction, no one to blame, just silence. This is the consequence the narcissist never anticipates. They overestimate their power and underestimate the empath's capacity for growth. They never imagined the day would come when the person they tried to break would rise instead. And so, when the super empath walks away, the narcissist doesn't just lose a partner, they lose the illusion that they were ever in control to begin with. Healing does not begin the moment the super empath leaves the narcissist. It begins the moment they realize they are no longer obligated to carry someone else's pain at the expense of their own. The departure is not a finish line, it's a threshold, and what lies beyond is both daunting and redemptive. The empath, now free from the constant emotional distortion, starts to reconnect with parts of themselves that had long been buried beneath the weight of survival. At first, this can be disorienting. The silence that follows the exit can feel deafening, and the absence of chaos, though peaceful, can feel unfamiliar. In the early stages of healing, the empath begins to mourn not just the relationship, but the version of themselves they lost in it. They grieve the time, the energy, the love they poured into someone who couldn't or wouldn't receive it. They grieve the missed opportunities, the forgotten dreams, the friendships that faded during the narcissist's reign. But unlike the narcissist, whose grief is rooted in the loss of supply, the empath's grief is rooted in truth. It is a necessary step, a cleansing of the emotional wounds that had been ignored for far too long. As the dust settles, something remarkable begins to happen. The empath's intuition, once clouded by manipulation, begins to resurface. Their emotional clarity sharpens. They start to notice red flags they once ignored and patterns they once normalized. They may reflect on past conversations and finally see the gaslighting for what it was. This self-awareness becomes a powerful tool not to beat themselves up, but to build better boundaries and reclaim their voice. The same sensitivity that once made them a target now becomes their armor. Boundaries, once foreign or difficult to assert, begin to take shape. The empath learns to say no without guilt, to prioritize their own needs without apology. They begin to trust their gut again, recognizing that self-care is not selfish, it is essential. For perhaps the first time, they realize that love does not have to be earned through suffering, and that peace is not a reward for loyalty, it is a right. This shift in mindset marks a deep transformation, one rooted in self-respect rather than survival. Through this process, the empath also begins to shed the toxic narratives that were implanted during the relationship. They no longer believe they are too sensitive, too emotional, or too much. They stop trying to fix everyone and start focusing on what they actually want, what they actually feel, and who they actually are without the constant influence of someone else's dysfunction. There is a return to authenticity, a slow, steady rediscovery of their passions, their confidence, their joy. In time, the empath may even come to a place of forgiveness, not for the narcissist's sake, but for their own. Forgiveness in this context is not about excusing the abuse or denying the damage. It's about releasing the emotional hold the narcissist had over them. It's about refusing to carry resentment that doesn't belong to them. It's about choosing freedom over bitterness and growth over stagnation. The rebirth of the super empath is not a linear path. There will be setbacks, moments of doubt, and even fleeting temptations to return to the familiar chaos. But each time they choose themselves, they rewrite the story that was forced upon them. They are no longer the rescuer, the fixer, or the emotional caretaker of someone else's broken ego. They become the guardian of their own peace, the author of their own life. In this new chapter, they don't just survive, they thrive. Their empathy becomes wiser. Their love becomes more discerning. Their light, once dimmed, begins to shine, not for someone else's approval, but as a beacon of their own truth. And in that truth, they find everything the narcissist could never offer: safety, respect, and most importantly, self-love.